So welcome to the Crazyhouse World Championship match between Bugzilla and Jasugi99. This is the first game out of 10, 3+2 time control. We have Bugzilla playing one of his favorite openings with an early d4 and e4, e5 and bishop e7. And I was just saying when the microphone was muted before that I don't think knight takes c4 is recommended. But yeah, we'll see. It's either knight f5 or knight h5 and make a vacancy on g7. And I assume Jasugi's either going to plug that up with a pawn or bishop at f6 perhaps. Okay, and Jasugi, look at the time difference. Bugzilla's up over a minute already. Hello David, is that Duvid? So YouTube's for political commentary, is it Duvid? And Twitch is for gamers. So knight takes g7. I don't think Jasugi's going to be brave enough and take that. So perhaps bishop f6. Yeah, I'm a bit surprised Jasugi's gone into e4, e5 mainline theory because yeah, as I said, Bugzilla is very well prepared for this early d4. So is it going to be bishop at h6 to cut the king going backwards? But then you can take and perhaps come back to g8. Hi guys, welcome. I was almost about to stream Bugzilla versus the finisher last night, but I was eating dinner. And if I haven't eaten a big meal all day, then that's more important than streaming. I would have been grumpy. Pawn at h6. Yeah, probably better than bishop at h6, picking up the rook. But Jasugi's hanging in there because a rook is not immediately fatal for black. So opening up the bishop, if he has a chance to play bishop e6, he might even think about king d7 and king c8. So a very strange position with two dark square bishops for Bugzilla. What would Bugzilla do here? He really needs a bishop for b5, doesn't he? I don't actually see any fantastic moves for white in this position. He's a bit undeveloped. As I said, the rook doesn't do a lot. Hey, PKR, welcome. Yeah, I'd expect Bugzilla to put the rook on g3 for safety, just to cover g2, which is his only weakness. Yeah, I can try and pull the bishop back out of the way and rook at h8, but I don't really know that it achieves very much. Yeah, and bishop e6, king d7. White doesn't have any pawns to harass the bishop. So queen e2, bishop e6. And seems like black somehow survived the opening, even though it's meant to be good for white. This is Jasugi's specialty. Nobody really knows how he does it. But he sometimes plays into mainline openings and then you think, oh yeah, this is just going to be +5 for white, and then somehow worms his way out of a difficult position. Nobody knows how he does it. If Katask was here, he would even say it's always +10 for white. So c6, the aim of this is to, well, give the king some options. Perhaps he'll be safe on c7. You can choose which color square that you go to if you have to evacuate. And you notice Jasugi hasn't moved any pieces onto this d4 h8 diagonal, so white can trade, because the bishop on h8 really doesn't do a lot at the moment. I think Jasugi happy to go into a time scramble. And the finisher did quite well in the time scrambles yesterday against Bugzilla. Alright, f4. We have a serious threat of playing f5 next. Perhaps perhaps pawn at f5? No, knight takes h6, opens up the queen. f5 anyway. Oh, you can take back with the f-pawn. This is okay. For black, he may drop the knight on c4. No, it's been sitting there a long time, the knight on c4. But now that I have a fresh look, it's actually looking okay for white again, because he's just picked up a couple of pieces. Defending g2, defending f2. So this is Jasugi's idea to pile up on the bishop, but Bugzilla will sack the queen. And there's no knight for f2 in hand. There's no smothered mate anywhere at the moment. Probably rook takes. But still, it can pull the rook over for defense. I'm not sure how Bugzilla is getting in though. He needs to make something happen. I mean, he's happy to sit there and defend, but he's barely holding on to this smother mate. If Jasugi can distract this knight, then there'll be a queen at g1. But then he wants to stop knight at e5 check, so... Okay, bishop takes, knight takes. Now he's got to be careful. No, still... Black needs another knight for f2. So the idea of this rook at e1 is to pile up on g2. So take here. Still no way to deflect the queen away from the rook on f1. Picking up, what was that, a knight on e2? No counterattack. Alright, Bugzilla's finally going for it with pawn at d5. It's going to be an exciting finish. He's doing everything with check. Oh yes, knight at f2, knight takes queen check. And queen h4 mate. And there was no defense because... if you blocked on f2, just rook takes would still finish with queen at h4. Alright, very well played, Jasugi. Well, actually, now that I think about it, if rook takes f2, you could still play king h1. Maybe there was a mate with rook takes h2, wasn't sure. Anyway, let's forget about that now. So, first game goes to Jasugi after what seems like a good opening for white, but then he got his bishop stuck in the corner and the rook wasn't really the piece that he needed. So Bugzilla didn't find the best way to punish black for the hold on g7. Alright, so we have this Alekhine opening without knight c3, so it still gives white a chance to push f3 and try and win the knight on e4. Bugzilla usually just leaves it there and then starts dropping pawns around the king side. So bishop comes back to d3. Have not seen this before, but seems okay for black. He's going to have the three bishops advantage after the trade. And Bugzilla's fairly comfortable in these kinds of positions. But now he can trade for the knight on c3 if he wants, and then replace the bishop somewhere on the king side. Probably g6. So Royale Maniacs is asking how many matches still left in the candidates. Well, that depends which player you're talking about. I don't know what's happened to King Switcher. He played a couple of matches and then nobody seems to have heard from him. Jasugi's a few matches behind. But most of us are up to about round 6, which is halfway through. Alright, Bugzilla really taking his time here. He's got a knight and a bishop in hand. No direct weaknesses. He doesn't really want to develop the bishop on f8 without allowing knight at h5, so that's why I was suggesting a safety first move like bishop at g6, but no. Going for the sack on g2 perhaps. Bishop at g5. Yeah, how to continue for black, because no easy way to kick away this knight on h5. So Jasugi just piling up and intending to clear away some of these dark square defenders so he can eventually put a knight on f6. Yeah, so I think white has the advantage, but it all depends on if Bugzilla can find some way to maintain a grip in defense. There was also a sack on e6, that's why he's brought the bishop back to d7. Is this CWC? I've already had that question today. Kleine Bier. Now, one CWC feels like an eternity, says Real Maniacs. Yeah, I prefer tournaments to be over in one day. I even find to completely lose focus at the end of a 10-game match. So, yeah, a couple of years ago. Yeah, once a match is 6-love, but that's because people quit after 6 games, whereas if it went to 10, you know, I could easily just lose the next 4 because I have a short attention span. Nah, not really, but somehow I tend to lose focus in the later games of a match. So rook h7. Is Jasugi just gonna trade a couple of times and replace on f6? You would think. Ah, knight at h5. Might as well gain a tempo on the rook. Can he just take on g5 and go knight f6? Is there something wrong with this? Pawn at g7. Uh-oh, this is very scary because now gotta watch out for ideas of sacking the queen on the rook and then rook at f8 check, or rook at h8 perhaps. So Bugzilla is trying to hide his rook so nothing can sack for it. But now, what do you take back with? Bishop f6. The pain is coming. I would not like to take black in this position. Yeah, just replace. Queen's either got to go out to a3 or what? Yeah, queen a3. Oh, bishop at h7. This is going to be too much to defend, I think. If rook h6, just queen takes g5. Oh, you can promote. Oh, this is tragic. Is rook at f8 directly mating? What was that piece? That was just a pawn. Alright, so Bugzilla's hanging in there, but there's a queen at h8 I'm expecting. Bishop at, and then... No? He's gone this way. So he can't play king g8 because the queen at h8. Uh-oh. He's resigned. What was coming after king g8? I don't know. Probably just knight at f6 or something. But yeah, not a fun position to defend. So 2-0 Jasugi. Anyone want to make a prediction? Kleine Bier, has Jasugi gone 10-0 against anyone? I can't quite remember. I was going to predict 7-3 Jasugi before the match. I figure if I can get 2 lucky wins against Jasugi, Bugzilla can get 1 more at least. So I don't think Jasugi's going to repeat bishop e7, but then Bugzilla, I think, should be prepared against d6. He's going for this one-trick pony knight g5, which Kleine Bier knows all about. Knight g5, knight takes h7. Yeah, I'm sure Bugzilla knows this. He's played it before. Knight g5. Can't do much else except castle. Knight takes h7. So most people think this is good for white. I'm not entirely sure. Well, I'd take black one game just to see if somebody can punish me. But the thing is, after d6 and bishop e7 and knight f6, black doesn't have a lot of choices. I mean, knight g4 is known to be losing after h3, and then you wait for the knight to move, you throw in a queen h5 check. The only thing you have to know is that there's some line where you can sack the queen and drop pawns to mate. It's a bit hard to work out over the board if you haven't seen the idea before. But Jasugi thinking so early is not a good sign for him again, just like in game 1. I really wasn't expecting him to go into these e4, e5 lines. Maybe somebody gave him advice that Bugzilla doesn't know much theory, but no, he knows enough. He knows enough. Maybe not quite as much as the finisher, but if he's still got 2 minutes 49 on the clock, then you think you know what he's doing from here. And I'm sure I've seen him play this sort of position before. Yeah, but PKR, the move order is important. If you start with d6, then it's very different to 3 bishop e7. And of course, you can still play d4 and move 4, but it's just, it leads to different positions. It gives black more options after d6, d4. Alright, so this is what I was talking about, and the move is bishop takes f7. I'm sure Bugzilla knows this. He's seen it lots of times. It's just a matter of maybe it's been 3 or 6 months since he's played it. Maybe he can't quite remember the move order, but I'm sure he's seen all the ideas before. It has been played surely 10 times at least on the database. Someone can check. Yeah, so the trick is knight takes h1, pawn g6, and then queen takes h6 leads to mate. Otherwise, white's not only winning a stack of material, but also, yeah, still got the attack with, I would assume, pawn at g6. Even pawn to g6 allows a bishop sack on h6 in the end. But all right, is this just going to be game over soon? Now there's rook at e8 and rook at g8 to watch for. So Jasugi defending the back rank, but what about... Oh, g6 can be answered by knight at f6 now. So he's doing it with checks, rook at e8. You gotta make Bugzilla find the mate because he doesn't like to calculate. He just likes to play and not think too much. That's always good advice, playing Bugzilla to make him work out the mate if it's a mate in 5 or 7. Rook at h7 is just a mate in 3. Yep. It's good enough. So, yeah, I mean, if Jasugi played theory against me, I could have picked up a couple more wins too, but so it's good to pretend that you know nothing, you know. Good match strategy to pretend that you know nothing and play random stuff in the opening sometimes. Pretend you have no idea what you're doing. So I've seen this a couple of times already. This time without knight c3. Yeah, I think last game, yeah, Jasugi pulled the bishop back to d3 and didn't try to win a piece in the opening, and just had a couple of piece trades. But it seemed Jasugi knew exactly where to place his pieces to keep putting pressure on the king side, in particular f6. So I'm not sure whether Bugzilla is going to repeat knight b4. Any other brilliant ideas? I think Clearcast has played something like knight d6 in a similar position. Or maybe he waits for f3 first and then knight d6. But okay, I mean, if you're going to play something different, I like h5 just to get some sort of counter-attack going. Prevent knight at h5. Even better when you haven't had to sack a piece in defense. So is he going to put the knight back on e4? Or I really don't like this pawn structure for black, because these pieces on the queen side, they're just purely defensive pieces at the moment. None of black's pieces are aimed towards the king, except vaguely the rook, but you need some more pawns and stuff. Doesn't it help black develop, says PKR, to go bishop b5, bishop d7, then bishop d3? Probably need someone more well versed in this opening to answer that correctly, but I think bishop b5 is played just to put the bishop somewhere and get it out of the way, so you can play knight e2 and castle and f3. I think that's the idea. So you're waiting for black to play e6, leaving the knight hanging on f6, and then you take the knight on f6. And as soon as black plays knight e4, then I think your bishop is not so well placed on b5. And so it kind of makes some sense to bring it back to d3 and not let black set up tricks like knight takes e5 and trading the light square bishops off. That's my attempt at an answer, although I'm not so familiar with these structures. So what have we seen? Knight at e4, bishop e3, knight e7, bishop takes d takes, knight at g5, and bishop at g6. So I thought Jasugi would just respond immediately with knight at f4, or maybe he wants to go knight to f4. Seems like a knight's begging to be placed on f4 somewhere. Or is he going to gang up on e4 with knight at c5? So knight e7 has a couple of ideas, possibly to reroute the bishop to c6 so it can support the pawn. And I suppose knight at c5 could be answered by bishop c6, but then you got to work out, is the sack on e6 dangerous with the two knights? So I think that's what both players are looking at, because you don't just want to let the pawn drop on e4 for nothing. But if you don't play bishop c6, then what else is there to do? Knight d5. Okay, this is a bit surprising. There is an immediate threat to take on e3 and take g5, so I would assume knight takes e4, one of the knights. So Bugzilla has sacked a pawn, because perhaps he thought the knight sack on e6 was dangerous. I wasn't quite sure. So I'd still like to play knight f4 if I was Jasugi. Perhaps he can kick away the knight on d5 somehow. Oh, defending passively with pawn at d3, using his extra pawn. I mean, perhaps c4 was too aggressive. Jasugi has more pawns than his opponent, yeah. Playing with the white pieces too. So Jasugi seems to be taking a measured approach against Bugzilla, not just going full out for the attack. I mean, game 1, the opening looked very shaky. Alright, so Bugzilla's found a way to open up this bishop. But yeah, rook at g4 is a very good response because it's supported so many times. It also protects g2 backwards. And finally, Jasugi is getting into g6, which is the thematic plan. Bishop at g3. Is there a direct threat, or does he need a pawn on f2 or h2 to continue? Not quite sure what happens on knight takes g6. Oh, knight takes e6 instead. What is this? Oh, this... I still can't see what Bugzilla is threatening with all these diagonals. Doesn't he still need a pawn for h2? Yeah, that open f-file certainly looks scary. Hello, Mixu. But is there a direct mate? Oh, he's going for it because that Bugzilla needs that pawn to attack. But what's the plan? Just bishop at c5? Oh, bishop at f6. He's throwing everything in. King d8, pawn at e7, yeah, this knight at c5 was why I didn't want to go to d7, but I think he was out of options at that stage. So pawn at e7, queen at f8. Yep, nicely done from Jasugi. So I think he pretty much worked it out after sacking the rook on f8 that he had enough diagonal pieces. Scoreline is now 3-1 Jasugi. And game 3 was pretty much all theory. So Jasugi's finally mixed it up. As I said a number of times, I'm a bit surprised he's gone for these e4, e5 main lines twice against Bugzilla. So another one of Bugzilla's favorites. And I wish Jasugi played this against me as well. Huh, that's 3 times. But he was doing all kinds of funny Scandinavian stuff with queen e6 and queen g6 against me. Alright, Bugzilla plays this a lot with the white pieces, so... Are we going to see Jasugi think for a minute again on move 6? So pawn at e6 would be the safe option. Pawn at e4 is possible. But yeah, the move is pawn at c4. I think there was some funny position I had where a6 and d4 were thrown in, then black has a response bishop at b4. Actually turns out to be okay for black. That's quite surprising considering that white virtually has an extra move with d4. That doesn't turn out so good. There's a lot of Katas Jasugi is Mixo saying in e4, e5. Yeah, but if you go back and revisit games 1 and 3 Mixo, you'll see that it was a bit of a disaster for Jasugi in the opening. Yep, so this position's fairly well known. Bugzilla has taken the black side against me a few times, and he's played bishop at e6. And then pawn at d5, you have this trick of knight at f6 check. You certainly don't want to put the bishop on e7, and then that weakens the f6, g7 squares too much. You just respond with pawn at h6 and dig some holes. Okay, pawn at e5 I haven't seen before. Let's see what's the most normal looking response against this knight f3 without thinking too much. Yeah, there's no real good discovered attacks with the knight to threaten queen takes e5 check, so knight f3 seems sensible. Perhaps bishop g4 or bishop at h5. Could try and win a pawn with queen takes c4. Yeah, it's a funny move. The pawn's just sitting there, unprotected. But now what? It's not the best time to play queen takes c4, but then bishop f3, gf3. Again, it says he played bishop e. Does he mean bishop at e6 or just bishop to e6? Bishop to e6 seems even shakier than bishop at e6. Well, there's a fun queen sack line where white can sack the queen. I played it once against Bugzilla. Bishop at e6, pawn at d5, pawn at d3, and then d takes e6. So you leave the queen hanging temporarily on e2. And then you draw the king out, e takes f7 check. It's a fun line for both sides. Alright, so Bugzilla has accepted the impaired pawn structure on the king's side. You can always replace it with a pawn here, but I assume Jasugi's not going to let him. So 11 moves, and it looks like Jasugi hasn't developed a piece. He's a pawn down. A very strange opening indeed. Do you bother playing knight at g2 check? Because if you do anything else, then white can always just replace with a pawn. Okay, bishop e6, queen b5 check. So, alright, again, now this is more Jasugi style, right? Sacking a couple of pawns in the opening for some activity. So Bugzilla with the positional advantage, material advantage, clock advantage, opening advantage. I mean, in terms of knowing the theory. Alright, okay, maybe not positional advantage then if you look at this hole on g2 and what was he intending on queen takes b7? Knight at d4 perhaps in response. Alright, but this looks better. Pawn at d5, not getting too greedy and taking on b7. Alright, finally we see the check. Oh, I don't know whether I would have gone this way to f1. Now how do you defend g2 and the queen at the same time? Oh, does he have to sack on f7? And you could allow pawn at g2 and take with the king. Rook at f1 or rook at e1. Block. I wouldn't even look into that too much. But then if you sack the queen, you still got to defend e2 and g2 at the same time. Could put a bishop on c4, defends e2, but then finishes saying king d1, pawn at e2. Oh yeah, okay, so you go check and take the queen anyway. So, wait a second. Does that mean this whole pawn at d5 was wrong? Wow. Reminds me of that new game on Fish Random. It's that one where you can move the knight lots of times in a row. Can't remember what it's called. But it has to be in a straight line, so you can go from g2 all the way up to e6 if there's nothing blocking you in the way. Alright, so he sacked the queen. He can cover e2 with bishop check, but then no, he's not covering either square. So he's going to make black block, but black can play c5. No, he can't play c5. Got to put a pawn on, but then still got too much to cover. Yeah, it's called Knight Rider, I think. Knight Rider, it's one of the new ones. Oh! Dropped the bishop and then made on d1. Was there any way out? Yeah, that whole sequence was very painful. Starting with bishop takes d5. Alright, so maybe greed was good. Queen takes b7. Was that the move? Or was it better just to defend with pawn at g2 now that he had the chance? And then just patch up the hole. Alright, amazing game from Jasugi, considering again it was a very shaky opening. So 4-1, the scoreline could easily be 3-2 in favour of Bugzilla. Yeah, so as of a few days ago, Knight Rider chess, Werewolf chess, Pawn Sideways chess. I've had a few Pawn Sideways chess games, but I can't seem to utilize that added feature of the pawn to move sideways. I just can't make any use out of it, because I've had a few games where it's been a symmetrical pawn structure. We traded off heavy pieces and then pawns are kind of blocked in the center, and if you move it sideways, all you do is end up doubling your own pawns or tripling your pawns. It can be useful in the endgame if you need to make a passed pawn or a breakthrough somewhere. I think it's most interesting in the endgames rather than the openings, the pawn sideways. And I have no idea what werewolf chess is. Let me just come back a few moves. I missed the opening. So it was the pawn sack line. Fairly non-theoretical, and this is not played very much. Pawn at d5. Bishop c5. Actually, now that I think about it, I don't know this very well, but I think Bugzilla has played it a few times. It's a bit unusual, sacking the whole piece. So focusing on king safety above all. And again, making Jasugi defend with that extra pawn, and hasn't done much, hasn't had time to do much with the extra piece. No more bishop plus rook pawn fortress, says Gena. Yeah, in the pawn sideways. So it will certainly change endgame theory. Yeah, I've played a couple of times that pawn bomber game where you choose a pawn and then it's like Atomic. You can choose to blow up the pawn at any time and all the pieces surrounding one square also blow up. But it's hidden, so you don't know which one is your opponent's. And you can even move it forwards and take stuff and then it still doesn't blow up. Whereas I had a game in that where we took like 90% of all the pieces on the board and that there were still pawns and nothing blew up. So still you got to be careful even when you're queen up, and not to go next to the opponent's pawns if you don't know which one it is. Alright, so they've just traded bishops. And Jasugi's defending the sack on f2. Yeah, I was going to say knight at f4 and make him drop the bishop somewhere. Bishop at f3 looks good. So Bugzilla is the player that has to find some compensation here. And that seems to come, at least in the short term, in the lack of development in these pieces here. The bishop on c1, the knight on g1. Stealth Bomber says, Mixu, I once exploded my own queen by accident. Yeah, it's... And there are a lot of games which introduce random elements, like that one, and there's a hidden queen. And there's some other game where you choose... Is it the royal pawn? Where you choose a pawn to be the king. That's a strange game. I never heard of a piece called a man, which acts like a king, but it can be taken. Until I saw that website, I never heard of a man, M-A-N-N. So, Bugzilla has displaced the king with knight takes d3 check, king f1. Still some vague sort of threats on f2, but the knight on e4 does seem to hold the threats at the moment. What to do? How do you get in? And these squares are fortified so many times. E4, defended twice. F2, defended twice. I'm looking at bishop at a6 or bishop at c4, but I think it can just easily be blocked out with pawn at e2. Don't really see the point. Any bishop move around the king side, white can just drop a pawn and attack. So Bugzilla keeping the pieces on the board, avoiding the trades. Yeah, Jasugi should kick away this knight on d3. That's getting a bit hard for Bugzilla because he's really the one that has to prove that all the sacks are worthwhile. So seems to be taking a dark square strategy, putting bishops and pawns on the dark squares. Chicken making a comment in the chat that Jasugi's not interested in attacking very much. No, I mean, actually, after the piece sack and the pawn sack in the opening, there were not a lot of opportunities for Jasugi to attack early. He's just happy taking the material, I think. So it's now 2 pieces for a pawn. Still no inroads for Bugzilla. Gotta watch out for this bishop hitting the queen at some point. Alright, what's this? Bishop sacks just to clear the space on the first rank. 3 knights together. Bugzilla's a piece down, but he's the one defending. Pawn at d5. Yeah, what to do? Just grab the queen. He'd rather the tempo than the queen. Yeah, this looks totally 1-0. Can't see any counter-attack for Bugzilla now. And Jasugi's the one with the material advantage and the one attacking. Just put the knight on, attack the queen. Pawn at f7 coming. Yeah, he doesn't have to think too much here. Alright, so the scoreline blows out to a 5-1 lead for Jasugi. And let's see. What did we see last time? Knight f6 and d5. Yeah, I'd be happy to repeat that if I was Bugzilla and just avoid this pawn at d5. I'd go all the way up to there. I think queen b5 check is still good. Alright, we're going to see the finisher opening, huh? What do we see? Pawn at f6 and then e6. So it seems that pawn at g6 didn't turn out too good. I wonder what the movie. I was going to say knight h3, because you'd rather use the knight on the board and leave the knight for potential. It's not that easy to stop knight to g5 check. You don't even have to worry too much about bishop takes h3, because you can respond knight at g5 check, or even queen takes h3 is okay at the moment. You've got to make sure black doesn't have a pawn for g4 or a bishop. So I'm even looking at castles or pawn at e4 perhaps. Yeah, pawn at e4. Invite the capture here. Alright, queen g3. And what happens on bishop takes e4? Is there a knight at g5 and a queen sack? But then if your queen ends up on g5, there's a knight at f3 check in response. So what was I missing? Well, maybe he sacks the queen this way and then goes knight at... No, you can't do that. Bishop takes e4. What was the response? Knight at g5, f takes... And queen takes e5? With multiple threats. Alright, so bishop g6 instead, pawn at d4, blocks out the queen, in case a queen sack is ever useful for white. But we are seeing Jasugi forced by his opponent to play more slowly and defensively than he's used to. Alright, that's more Jasugi style. Give the piece back for some activity, development. So material is equal. what's the plan for Bugzilla? Does he need to put the knights on straight away? Can he castle first? Or, well, actually his pawn's been hanging for a little while. E5. And what happens on bishop c5? Because you'd normally put a knight on, but these are covered by the bishop on g6. Perhaps then it's a good time to trade on f6. Not entirely sure what happens on bishop c5. Alright, yeah, a bit surprised Jasugi's gone totally passive, giving up a piece. Guess he just wants to build a wall of pawns. And it's a bit hard to understand. Because it seems like there were pawns hanging for several moves, but perhaps I'm missing something. I mean, why not bishop at b3 and point at the king if you want to protect the pawn? Queen b6. So if bishop e3, there's a pawn hanging on b2. It also stops castling. So what happens on knight at c4 in response? Queen c5. And then you can do tricks like knight at b5. I don't really see the point, because probably pawn at c7 or even just pawn at e7. So b3 instead. Threat is now bishop a3. It's a very unique position again. Don't quite understand how Jasugi does it, but you just watch. Oops. Didn't mean to close that. Yeah, you just watch how he turns a totally passive position, a piece down, into an attack in another 5 moves or so. And the thing is, you just can't see it coming. Like you wouldn't think by any stretch of the imagination that black will be the one attacking here. But yeah, Jasugi's one of these magical players that just has this ability to turn around a passive position, and whereas Bugzilla would be happy to defend for 40 or 50 moves. Alright, here we go. What's the idea? Bishop b7? And even when you see the idea, you think, yeah, surely white can defend. It doesn't even threaten anything. Bishop f3, pawn at e4. Alright, so now, I mean, it seems to me like Jasugi's blundered, because perhaps he didn't see all these captures and knight at g5 in the end, but I can't say for sure. Pawn at f7, just intending to pick up the piece on e4, I think. Alright, now surely this is just good for Bugzilla. But again, I wouldn't be so sure. Knight at g4. Yeah, Bugzilla does have to be careful if he moves around the queen too many times and allows drops with tempo. So he's gone for the counterattack pawn, f6, g takes. He wants to take the knight if it's defended, and then knight takes f6 check. So that's why Jasugi's fortifying these knight shapes in defense. Bishop takes h6, knight takes h6. I wonder if knight f6 goes anywhere. Pawn at g7 can easily be defended with knight at g6. What else? Wants to put pressure on the knight on h6. He could perhaps use a queen, intending a queen sack. But then perhaps knight ef5, so what's this? Just using the fact the rook is overloaded, defending the other rook? Yeah, these knights are going to be hard to break through. I think Jasugi's doing much better than he was before when he first sacked the queen on e4. H-Bar making an insightful comment in the game chat. He's saying the curse of playing a stronger opponent, that you always feel obliged to play a surprise on every move. Well, I find Jasugi's moves surprising in themselves. Alright, no direct threat. Can Bugzilla do something? Notice the bishop covering even the queen sack on h7, and the knight as well. Gotta find some way in, but the bishop can take. This is no good. He's waiting for this knight to move, so he can go knight at f7 check. And Bugzilla does need some forceful play. He's got the right idea. But just needs a pawn for g7 that he doesn't have. Pawn at f7, rook f6. Now the threat is on g7. Amazing defense from Jasugi. Still surviving, no way in. Can just block this on g8 and then threaten knight at f2. Uh-oh. No, that's it. It's smothered mate. And no defense. Wow, that was the most impressive game so far from Jasugi. 6-1. So, if you thought Jasugi was just an aggressive tactical player, then that game should change your mind. Amazing defense. Again and again he was put under pressure, and at one moment I just thought he completely blundered and had to sack the queen on e4, but maybe he saw everything and realized that the minor pieces were enough to defend. I mean, I'm sure Bugzilla had a better way to break through, but yeah, the thing is, often against Jasugi, you only get one or two slight chances. I mean, to really punish him, like a mate in 8 or just some really tricky move that's like a multiple overloading of pieces. And you have to find the right order when you exchange pieces and sack pieces to find the way in. But if you don't find it, and he's got the minor pieces, then like we saw there, I mean, it's a very rare kind of defense. The knight's on f7 and e7 when the pawn's on f6 and e6, because knights are notoriously bad defenders, but he just made it work somehow. So we had a different opening again with d6 instead of d5. So Jasugi seems to be doing very well in this structure with the pawns on d4 and e5. So it is another piece sack opening from Bugzilla. And he's already played rook e8, so he can respond to bishop takes with either knight at f5 or just take on f1 first. Alright, so typical Bughouse sort of plan. Chase the pieces away from your king side and then patch up. Could even bring the bishop back to f8 if this bishop clears out of the way. So it's always an interesting question if and when to take the rook when it's on offer. So talking about bishop takes f1, and then you'd assume queen takes f1. So to find your way in, yeah, you can check from a long distance, but to break through you often either need pawn at e3 and to hack away at f2 and a knight for h3, or some way to build up more slowly on the light squares. But if you've already sacked a piece, this can often be too difficult to achieve. Yeah, so Bugzilla's just leaving the rook there and waiting to see if Jasugi will move it out of the way or patch up and then sack another bishop. He might just go pawn at g7. Pawn at d4 is another move to try and block out the queen and then take on d5. Or you could feign at taking the knight and then go pawn at e3. That doesn't quite work at the moment, but it's an idea to keep in mind. And you don't want to go bishop c5 because then knight at e4. So probably pawn at d4 or patch up with g7. What else could you do? Actually, this move might be a bit annoying. Pawn at e6. Could you stop this with bishop f8? Alright, none of the suggested moves. Bishop b4. Queen d3 hitting the bishop. Well, now is a good time to take if he wants to. Just don't play pawn at g4 because then the knight will drop. Alright, I guess he's going to put the rook back because there's no way to build up more pieces and then put the rook on later. e4, alright, that's a surprise. What's the intention? Is there some trick with queen take? Knight takes e4, rook at g4 check, and the other rook takes. Jasugi could ignore this and go queen h3. But then perhaps there's a bishop takes and threatening knight at f3 check. Queen takes. Wow. I was not expecting this move. So material is approximately equal. Queen for 2 pieces. Yeah, Bugzilla can check on g4, but it is possible to defend with probably just bishop at g, even rook at g2. Or rook at g2, take, then you stick it on e1. And maybe bishop at g2 is better. And then if you sack, there's still no knight drop because the bishop... Actually, yeah, the bishops cover everything. So rook at e1 instead. This is certainly making Jasugi think. Knight at h6 check. Oh, what? Is he doing everything with check? Queen takes, knight takes, king f8. King f8. Well, this rook might be useful in defense, as well as the bishop. Huh? Alright, what was I missing? Knight h7, king e7, bishop f6, king d7. Or could you go back this way? Alright, maybe I'm missing something really obvious. Upon queen takes e8, knight f6, king f8. Pawn at g7, king e7? I don't quite understand. But what's just happened? Bishop takes h6. Yeah, it's crunch time here, so Bugzilla has to move. Knight at f3 check, king g2 is forced. Queen g1. Pawn at g4. King takes. Yeah, he's doing everything with checks. That was the whole key, because he couldn't allow... Yeah, he couldn't allow knight takes and pawn at g7. But now there's no counterattack, so this is surely game over. It should be win to Bugzilla. He could have even sacked a queen on f1 to pick up the bishop, but As long as he keeps the checks up. And there's no counter, just bishop takes bishop with check. Yeah, that's it. Alright, well done, Bugzilla. So Jasugi really went all in with the attack with a queen sack on e4. And maybe he saw this rook at e8 coming from a distance. But yeah, he came within a hair's breadth of mating with this knight at h6 check and rook at e8. So scoreline 6-2. And I was going to predict 7-3 Jasugi before the match. Let's see. So last white for Bugzilla. Okay, so I had this position against Jasugi with reverse colors. Let's see if Bugzilla goes for g4. He does. Certainly the most aggressive option. I think it's just good to play normal moves here and pretend that you're a tempo up with reverse colors. Bishop g2, castles. You wait for black to play h5. I mean, this is playable. Mixu's giving a line in the chat. Queen takes e8, knight takes king f8, bishop takes h6 and rook takes e1. Oh yeah, I missed that one. So it looks like Bugzilla's bishop at f8 was correct, and it remains to be seen if Jasugi missed something after that. Alright, so h5, g5, h4. Does stop knight h4. Now my question is, why can't you do this with the white pieces? Because normally you don't have a chance to play h5 with the white pieces so early. Is that because there's a knight on f6? And then it has to come to e4 and then white gets a move and white can play knight h4. So I've seen Kleiner Beer do this a few times with the white pieces. This h4, h5 idea with the white pieces in reverse. Seems to have turned out okay for black. Not sure what he's going to do with his king. Is he going to castle? Just going to leave it in the center. Take on g6. Put the bishop back on h2. Or what's this? Knight takes d5. So what's the intention? Just to go bishop takes if he takes. This is very messy. And he wants to keep a hold of g5, doesn't want to allow queen takes g5, so take with the pawn. Pawn at f6 looks good. Yeah, reminds me of Rai Lopez's Mixer on the other side of the board. But yeah, I'm sure you've seen games where variance only plays h5 with the idea to stop black playing knight h5. I think there was a game against Oppa in the team league. So pawn at f6, gf, ef, pawn at e4, just to cover, or block out the bishop from taking back on d5. So Jasugi's got, what is it, one piece for a pawn. And he's under some serious pressure here. That is every Rai Lopez, says Skinner. Every Rai Lopez you get to play a4, b4, a5. So do you call it an isolated pawn on b4 even though it's adjacent to other pawns just because it's all alone? Or maybe there's another word like a surrounded pawn or something, a different term rather than an isolated pawn. Jasugi's saying, why did I just do that? Oh, let me see. Oh, he sacked a queen for 2 pawns. Okay. Well, he's not going to get mated in the short term. He's also a long way from a counterattack. What's he intending? Pawn at f3? Can Bugzilla get in quick with bishop takes e7 and knight at f6 check? And queen at d7, king f8. Maybe not immediately. And if gf, queen f, knight f3, king h1, the bishop covers the rook on h2, so I don't see there's an instant mating threat for black. But also knight at f6. Can't quite see the finish. You don't want to bring the queen out of the way and then allow gf1. Because then you have to take with the king and then run and hope. Alright, he's given the bishop. I didn't quite understand what to do. Queen at e5. So he wants knight takes d5, trying to push the king to the back row, and then queen takes h8. And what happens on king f8, knight d7, king g8, knight f6, king g7. Draw. Knight h5, king g8, knight f6. You don't want to play king h7 because queen g7 and then knight f6 mate. Yeah, so I'm looking at knight h5. You don't want to play king h7. So Jasugi has to settle for a draw, if Bugzilla is going for it, of course. Any other options here for Bugs? Yeah, you might settle for a draw because there are some serious threats on the way. Knight d7, king g8. Yeah, okay. Oh, interesting if the computer would say 0, 0, 0 in that position, or whether there was any other possibility. So last game, I don't think anyone's predicted a 6.5, 2.5 scoreline, or, you know, +1 for either player. Considering this is game 10, d4, d5. So we could get something similar in reverse. Because Jasugi likes to be the first one to play bishop g5. No, he's gone bishop f4. I think he was mainly playing bishop g5 against me. And then how was I responding? Something symmetrical with bishop g4, I think. Alright, but this is very different, because I never see this early h5. Jasugi's asking, did I just miss knight b5? In which position here? Oh yeah, this is a Jabava special, isn't it? Knight b5? Isn't this called the Rapport Jabava opening? Knight b5. Yeah, and then you have to respond by sacking 2 pawns with e5 and then allowing queen takes d5. Does that work in Crazyhouse too? Probably does. Alright, but he's missed it. h5, knight f3, e6, knight e5, bishop b4. Alright, so black seems okay after all, after the knight b5 miss. So that's why you play bishop g4, huh? In response to bishop f4. And not knight c6 too early. Okay, what's just happened? f3, bishop f5, bishop b5. How to defend c6? Well, you don't, I guess. You just leave it there. But then you have to do something to counterattack. I don't really think you want to take here and drop a knight on e7. That's just too passive. Or knight on b8. But yeah, I don't know. I never know what to do in these kinds of positions. That's why I don't like to get into them in the first place. Knight at e7, yeah, possible. It's almost getting to the point I don't really want to watch. I can't stand playing black in this sort of position. And it's interesting with this h5 thrown in, if it will make a difference. So Bugzilla's abandoned the pawn. And it's got to find a weakness to attack. I mean, it's either bishop at b2 or bishop at h7 perhaps. But then that weakens the dark squares too much after pawn at h6. And then the rook is going to be dangerous if Jasugi can crack into g7. Alright, bishop at b2. I guess take on c3 first. No, he's gone for the rook. Wow, bishop takes a8. I don't know what's going on here. Queen's kind of out of play on a8 it seems. Well, so is the queen on a1. I think Jasugi would leave that there and counterattack with pawn at h6. If he's allowed to. But then how do you stop it coming? There's no drops with the rook anyway here. Rook at h7 just looks ridiculous. And White's always going to be the one with the first attack, pawn at h6. Yeah, I mean, he needs a pawn to attack, but White's a tempo ahead. Take pawn at g7. I assume he's going to sack, and then pawn at g5. Uh-oh. It's a bit like, what was it, game 2 when Jasugi had all this pressure on the king side, and then Bugzilla was just moving pieces backwards to defend, and yeah, with no counterattack. It's just too hard for black to attack in this position, because he keeps needing the move to defend. He's not going to have time for pawn at h3 if Jasugi attacks correctly. I suppose you could argue that the move h5 is kind of useful because it gives the king a bit more space and it stops the knight at h5. Yeah, we have a bot. How do I kick him out? Right click. Never kicked anyone out of the chat before. Ignore? I don't know. Yeah, it does look like 1-0. Whose move is it? Ah. Knight at g3. What's the aim here? Get rid of defender of the light squares. And what was that doing exactly? Bishop at h4. So g takes... he's got to take with the knight, surely. To stop knight takes h5 check. So you allow rook at g7, king h7? Oh no, sack here. What? Allow knight takes h5, king h8? No? Alright, well, Bugs has managed to defend this. This is still a game. I'm not sure if there's anything in pawn at g5, bishop takes, rook at g7, king h8. Can't really make it work. But yeah, harass the queen and probably eventually Bugzilla will have to give it away. I mean, in some positions, knight at h3 saves the tempo if you can check here, but yeah, something like that. But the queen's still hanging in the end. I mean, you can't threaten mate, you got to save the queen, or at least sack it with the tempo. So threat is, well, I mean, the king is safe for the moment on h8 after knight f6 check. Or is it really safe? Yeah, pawn at g7, rook takes, queen at f8, rook at g8. Ah, he's gone for the knight instead, okay. Take. What? That was quick. So what does the defensive move have to be here? Rook at h7. That looks disgusting. Does he have to play rook at h7, something like this? Knight takes. And this is still hanging. Yeah, the queen on f1 just keeps him too safe. Maybe there was something here. A bit hard to believe. Rook at h1 gets nowhere. Yeah, this is a really nice move, queen at h4. It's hard to find a good way to defend the knight and to stop knight at f7. Knight takes f7, checkmate as well. So pawn at g7, same thing. I wonder if this was a slip and if pawn at g7 was intended, or even rook at g7, but still. All right, so final score is 7.5, 2.5. I wonder if that's our first half a point. Let's check it out. We'll check out the standings. We'll see if this match has been updated. Where's Bugzilla? Oh, there he is. 2.5, 7.5. Oh, he's also had a draw against GSVC. How could I forget? How could I forget the draw against GSVC? 3.5, 6.5. So GSVC is yet to lose a match. He's had a draw against Chicken. And mostly narrow victories, 6-4 or 6.5, 7-3 over Master 10. And the standings really, I have to say, don't mean a lot at the moment because some people still have 9 matches to play, 7, 6, 5. So you could say Chicken is leading at the moment, but Jasugi still got 2 matches to catch up. And they are against King Switcher and GSVC. So he's played his week 7 match already. Can't quite see. Oh yeah, Mugwort, King Switcher. Maybe I'll get a week off if King Switcher's not playing at the moment. But yeah, that was actually a round 7 match. And yeah, Jasugi versus GSVC is going to be exciting. I think GSVC asked Katas to sub in for him that week. Feeling the fear already, the Jasugi fear. And are there any upcoming matches? No, that's it for the moment. So what is coming up soon? Chicken Crossroad versus Schwanet, Penguin versus Master 10, GSVC versus Art of Deception, and Finisher versus Variance. Any from round 6 that still need to be completed. So we had Bugzilla versus the Finisher last night, or I guess it was this morning, European time. Schwanet Mugwort. I don't know if I want to tell the scoreline if someone was recording. But yeah, it's obviously some of my recent games on my history. You can check that out. A total blunderfest, by the way. I don't think I was happy with any of the 10 games. Maybe game number 9. So finally won a game with d4, d5, playing the black side. That was a pretty good game, game number 9. So Liam Putnam Chess, thanks for the follow earlier. He's asking, what are the requirements for this CWC Crazyhouse World Championship? Well, it's a year-long event which starts in, I think, late January or early February. You needed to register back in January. So it starts out with a double knockout, which means you have to win 4 matches in a row to qualify, but even if you lose one, you still get a chance to qualify in the elimination bracket. And there are 12 candidates in total. We have a round robin, so the names you can see here on the screen. And And yeah, I think they're all their complete names and the nicknames up the top. So double knockout bracket, thanks Mixu, you can check that out. And we could also put a link here if you want to check out in more detail the current standings. And any other round 6 matches, Chicken versus Art of Deception, I think that was a couple of days ago. Oh yeah, Jasugi GSVC. Have we had Penguin versus Variance yet? Yeah, obviously Master 10 and King Switcher. I still have to play the match. I think I will leave it. It's the beginning of my weekend. It's pretty early on Saturday morning, Sydney time. It would be good if there were some more matches this weekend because I have a bit of free time. But it does happen that most of the matches are either at 4 AM Sydney time or they're when I'm only on the mobile phone. So Mix is saying Variance only 173 over Penguin. Yeah, I might have caught that on the mobile phone, I'm not quite sure. But I don't remember. I can't even remember many of my own games anymore against Schwanet. It's all a bit of a blur. Game 9 was good. Game 9 was shocking. I think I played some Bishop G5 move in the opening, and then I realized straight away that's just a total blunder. Anyway, you can check it out if you like. Will never be repeated again. Rightio, I'll leave it for now, take a break. I look forward to the players scheduling more matches. And I can try and contact King Switcher, but I might have a bye this round and be able to take a break. So, thanks for watching. Have a good weekend, everybody, if it's your Friday night or Saturday. And we'll see you soon.